"You should not be out here alone," Jack McGrath said, his voice a low rumble against the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt streets of Widow's Hollow into a river of red mud. This is not a place for anyone to be wandering at 2 a.m. The woman spun around, fast as a startled deer. Her dark hair was plastered to her pale skin, and her eyes were wide, darting from the dark alleyways to the flickering lamp of the general store, before finally landing on him. He could see right away she wasn't from these parts. Her dress, though torn and filthy now, was made of fine material. Her boots, caked in clay, were delicate leather, not meant for this kind of country. "I do not need your pity," she snapped, her voice thin but sharp. She pulled a threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, a useless gesture against the driving cold. Jack took a half-step closer, his work apron creaking. The hammer and tongs on his belt gleamed in the dim light. "I am not offering pity," he said, keeping his tone even. "I am offering a place that has warmth, clean water, and no drunken miners looking for trouble." That made her pause. He saw her lips quiver, and it wasn't just from the cold. He saw the tremor in her hands, the way her gaze kept flicking back toward the dark end of the street, like she was expecting something terrible to come roaring out of the blackness. "What happened?" he asked, softening his voice just a little. She looked down, hiding her face. I got robbed. My purse, my traveling papers, everything." The story came out too smooth, too practiced. Jack had lived in this rough town his whole life. He knew what a real robbery victim looked like. They were dazed, or angry, or weeping. This woman was none of those things. She was terrified, yes, but it was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of being found. He let the silence stretch, the only sound the drumming of rain on the tin awnings. He should have walked away. He had a 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, sleeping soundly in their small cabin. He had no room in his life for complications, no time for risks. But the woman standing before him was a puzzle of pride and fear, and it stirred something in him. He made a decision that would change everything. "All right," he said, the words feeling heavy in the damp air. "I live just past the church. It is not much, but it is warm. You can sleep by the fire for the night." She looked like she wanted to argue, to maintain that fierce independence, but a sudden tremor shook her body, and her knees buckled. "Thank you," she whispered, the fight finally gone from her voice. They walked through the mud in silence. He kept his distance, but his eyes were constantly scanning the shadows. His cabin was small, just 2 rooms built of sturdy logs he'd cut himself. He unlocked the heavy door and pushed it open, letting her step into the dim warmth. A fire was dying in the hearth, casting long shadows across the clean-swept floor. A child's corn-husk doll sat on the table, next to a pair of tiny worn boots. "Take your boots off there," he said, pointing to a mat by the door. "The settle is yours for the night. There are extra blankets in that chest." She nodded, not meeting his eyes, and began to unlace her ruined boots. Jack walked into the back room, not to hide his money like she might have thought, but to check on Sarah. His daughter was a tiny lump under a patchwork quilt, her breathing soft and even. He felt a familiar ache of love and protectiveness. When he returned to the main room, he brought a thick wool blanket, a clean towel, and one of his own dry work shirts. "Wash basin's in the corner," he said, handing the bundle to her. "Water's fresh from the well." She took them, her fingers brushing his. For a second, her eyes flickered up to his face, filled with a confusion that went beyond her current predicament. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he was uncomfortable. "Because you looked like you needed help," he said simply, "and I would hope someone would do the same for my daughter if she ever found herself in trouble." At the mention of his daughter, the woman flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but he saw it. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. While she washed the grime from her face and hands, he quietly made a cup of hot tea with a dollop of honey, setting it on the small table beside the settle where she would sleep. He added a few more logs to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the back room, pulling the thick curtain closed behind him. Clara May, though she hadn't given him her name, felt the warmth of the cabin seep into her bones. The oversized shirt smelled of sawdust and clean sweat. The fire crackled, a comforting sound against the relentless rain. On the table, he'd left a note scrawled in careful script. "If you need to send word to anyone, Mrs. Henderson at the general store can help with telegrams. Please keep voices low. My daughter is a light sleeper." She ran her fingers over the warm tin cup. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a sliver of peace settled over her. This man hadn't asked her name, hadn't questioned her story, hadn't made her feel like a burden. He had simply helped. She curled up on the settle, pulling the heavy wool blanket over her, and listened as the storm began to fade. As she drifted off, her exhausted body finally giving in, her foot brushed against the torn hem of her dress. A tiny, hard object, no bigger than a pea, dislodged from the fabric where it had been caught. It fell silently onto the braided rug, rolled a few inches, and came to rest in the deep shadows under the settle. A single, perfect pearl, gleaming faintly in the dying firelight. It was the kind of pearl that could buy a man's cabin 10 times over. And it proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that her story of being a simple robbed traveler was a lie. Clara woke to the sound of a child's laughter. For a moment she had no idea where she was. The air smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Morning sunlight streamed through a small window, dust motes dancing in the golden rays. She sat up, the wool blanket pooling in her lap. Across the room, a little girl with a riot of auburn curls was building a tower with wooden blocks. "Hi," the girl said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "You are the princess who slept by our fire." Clara blinked, surprised. "My name is Sarah," the little girl announced. "Papa said a nice lady stayed over because she was caught in the rain. That is you, right?" Clara managed a small, genuine smile. "I suppose that is me. It is nice to meet you, Sarah." From the corner that served as a kitchen, a man's voice called out, "Sarah, breakfast duty. Come help me not burn the biscuits." Sarah giggled and scrambled to her feet, running toward her father. Clara stood, stretching her aching muscles, and followed. Jack was cracking eggs into a sizzling cast-iron skillet. "You cook?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice. He glanced over his shoulder. "Only if Sarah is brave enough to eat it. Want to help?" She hesitated. "I can try, but I should warn you I am not very domestic." He handed her a wooden spoon with a ghost of a smile. "Neither am I. That is why we burn a lot of biscuits in this house." For the first time in days, Clara laughed. It was a rusty, unfamiliar sound, but it felt good. They moved around the small space together. Sarah climbed on a stool to butter the biscuits, while Clara tried to keep the eggs from sticking. It was a disaster. Her hand slipped, knocking over the salt dish and sending a shower of white crystals across the counter. "Oh no!" she gasped, but Sarah just handed her a rag with a grin. "It is okay. Papa spills things all the time." The simple, innocent acceptance from the child was so unexpected, Clara burst into real laughter. Jack said nothing, just quietly swept up the salt and kept cooking. When they sat down to eat, the eggs were rubbery and the biscuits were charred on the bottom. But Jack ate every bite, declaring it excellent. "You do not have to lie," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I am not lying," he insisted. "It is edible. That counts for something." After the meal, Jack cleared the plates. "You two rest. I will take care of this." As she and Sarah moved to the main room to play with the blocks, Clara glanced back. She saw Jack pull another plate from the warming shelf above the fire. On it were perfectly cooked eggs and golden brown biscuits. He had made a second breakfast for Sarah, just in case, and a profound, unspoken kindness settled in her chest. Later that morning, as they were building a block castle, Sarah leaned in close and whispered, "The eggs Papa made after were better, but it is okay. He still ate yours." Clara's eyes widened. "He made more?" Sarah nodded solemnly. "But he told me not to tell. Oops." Clara stood up and walked back to the kitchen area. Jack was just finishing his own second breakfast. She crossed her arms, a playful glint in her eyes. "So, I burned breakfast." He had the good grace to look sheepish. "You cooked breakfast, that is what matters." "Why not just tell me?" she asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, his gaze direct and honest. "Because the first time doing something is always difficult. You just need someone to eat it anyway." And in that moment, something shifted inside her. This man was unlike anyone she'd ever known. He was kind, without any expectation of reward. He was patient in a way that chipped away at the walls she'd built around herself. Later, as he washed the dishes, he spoke casually over his shoulder. "There is a laundry house down the street. Mrs. Henderson runs it. I could ask if she needs help if you are planning to stay in town for a while." Clara hesitated. "I might need to earn some money. I lost everything." He didn't pry. He didn't push for details about the papers and money she'd supposedly lost. He just nodded. "Let me know if you want me to walk you over there." This simple blacksmith had no idea who she really was. He didn't know the world of silk dresses and sapphire necklaces she'd run away from. And the strange thing was, he didn't care. He was helping her because she was a person in need, and that simple fact made her feel more seen than her father's fortune ever had. Just as she was about to agree, Jack knelt down to sweep the floor near the hearth. His hand brushed under the edge of the braided rug. He paused. Slowly, he pulled his hand back, and sitting in his calloused palm was the single, perfect pearl she thought she'd lost forever. He looked from the pearl in his hand to her face, and his expression was no longer warm and open. It was guarded, questioning. "This," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is not something a woman who lost everything would have." The lie she had built her safety on had just crumbled to dust at her feet. Clara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the pearl in his hand, a tiny, luminous accusation. Before she could think, she snatched it from his palm and shoved it deep into her pocket. I forgot I had it," she stammered, the lie sounding pathetic even to her own ears. Jack stood up slowly, his height suddenly seeming immense in the small cabin. His eyes, which had been so kind just moments before, were now hard as forged steel. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and firm, not angry, but demanding the truth. She couldn't answer. The name she'd been born with felt like a lead weight on her tongue. "Who are you, really?" he pressed, taking a step back, creating a chasm between them. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. "I am someone who walked away from a world where everything has a price except love," she finally said, the words tasting like ash. "That is all you need to know." His jaw tightened. "You lied to me." "I did not lie," she shot back, her own fear turning to defiance. "I left things out." "That is the same thing," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He was right, and the fact that he was right made it worse. She turned away, unable to bear the disappointment in his gaze. "Do you know what it is like?" she said, her back to him, "to be watched every moment, to be told who to love, where to go, what to become?" "No," he said, his voice flat, "but I know what it is like to be honest with someone who is not." The air grew thick with unspoken words. She felt the sting of tears, but refused to let them fall. She had run so far, only to be cornered by the one person who had shown her true decency. Before either of them could break the tense standoff, the cabin door swung open with a bang. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was dressed in a dark, city-style coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He held up a small photograph, and his sharp eyes locked onto Clara. "There she is," he muttered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He wasn't a lawman. He wasn't a detective. His clothes were too fine, his demeanor too predatory. "Clara," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your fiancé has been worried sick. And your father? Well, he is offering a substantial reward." Clara's blood ran cold. This was not a detective sent by her father. This was Alistair's man, the man she was supposed to marry, the man whose cold touch made her skin crawl, the man she had run away to escape. The man took a step into the cabin, his eyes sweeping over the humble room with a sneer. "He will be very interested to know you have been hiding out in a place like this, with a man like this." Jack moved instantly, placing himself between Clara and the intruder. "Get out of here," Jack growled, his hand instinctively going to the heavy tongs that still hung from his belt. The man chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Relax, friend. I am just here to collect what is owed." He looked past Jack, directly at Clara. "Alistair is not a patient man, Clara. You know that. He sent me to bring you back one way or another." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This was worse than she could have imagined. Her father would have been angry. Alistair would be vengeful. "Now," the man said, taking another step. In a split second, Jack made his move. He didn't reach for the tongs. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it. The man barely had time to raise his arm before the skillet connected with a sickening thud. He staggered back, cursing, clutching a bruised forearm. In that single moment of distraction, Jack grabbed Clara's hand. "The back door! Now!" They burst out into the bright sunlight, not stopping to look back. They ran through the small yard, past the woodpile and the chicken coop, their feet pounding on the hard-packed earth. They didn't stop running until they reached the thick woods behind the cabin. "What about Sarah?" Clara gasped, her lungs burning. "She is at the schoolhouse," Jack said, his breathing heavy. "She is safe for now, but we have to move fast." An hour later, Jack was lifting a confused and sleepy Sarah from the one-room schoolhouse. He didn't take her home. He drove his wagon down a winding side road to a small, neat cabin where an elderly woman with kind eyes was waiting. "Mrs. Ramirez," Jack said, his voice urgent, "I need you to keep her safe, just for a little while." The old woman didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and took Sarah's small hand. "You trust her?" Clara asked as they drove away. "With my life," Jack replied grimly. They rode toward the edge of town, the silence between them thick with fear. "Your shirt," Clara said suddenly. She pointed to his sleeve, which was torn at the shoulder, revealing a dark, angry bruise already forming on his arm. "What happened?" He glanced down. "When I pushed you out the door, he took a swing at me. It is nothing." "Why did you not say anything?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "As long as you and Sarah are safe, I can deal with a bruise." In that moment, Clara understood. Jack hadn't protected her because he thought she was a princess. He had protected her because he was a good man and she was in trouble. He protected her because it was who he was. They circled back to the cabin after sunset, approaching with extreme caution. His instincts were screaming that something was wrong, and he was right. 3 expensive-looking horses were tethered outside, and the windows of his small home were dark. "Stay in the wagon," he ordered, but she was already climbing down. "They are here for me. I need to face them." A tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadows of the porch. Even in the fading light, she recognized his rigid posture, the cold authority in his stance. He was flanked by 2 other men, their faces grim. "Clara," Winston Whitmore said, his voice like chipping ice. "This foolishness ends now. Get in the carriage." "Father," she whispered. Jack looked from the powerful man on the porch to the terrified woman beside him. "You are Winston Whitmore," he said, the name tasting like poison. "The railroad man." "I am," Winston replied, his eyes dismissing Jack as nothing more than an obstacle. "And you are the man who has been harboring my daughter." "I am the man who gave her shelter when she had nowhere else to go." Jack shot back, his voice ringing with defiance. Winston stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the modest cabin with open contempt. "This place, this life, it is beneath her. She does not belong here." "She made that choice," Jack said. "Not me." "You cannot keep her here," Winston sneered. "I am not keeping anyone." Jack's voice grew harder. "But I am not handing her over like she is a piece of property either." Winston's face darkened. "You do not understand. She is to be married. To Alistair Vance, it is a matter of business. A contract has been signed." So that was it. She wasn't a daughter to him. She was a contract, a business deal. "Father, stop!" Clara pleaded, stepping between them. "You have made your point," Winston said, ignoring her and gesturing to his men. "Now, come home." "This is home," she whispered, the words surprising even herself. "No," he said, his voice dangerously low. "This is where you ran. This is not where you belong. And if you refuse to come willingly, then perhaps your friend here needs to be reminded of how the world works. A blacksmith's forge can burn down so easily. A child can have an accident on the way home from school." The threat was unspoken, but crystal clear. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. He was using Jack and Sarah to control her. Jack turned to her, his face a mask of fury and concern. "Clara, you do not have to go." But she was looking at the elegant carriage, at her father's cold eyes, and she saw the cage she had tried so desperately to escape. Tears streamed down her face. "I think I do," she said quietly. "No one is forcing you," Jack said, his voice raw. "Yes," she whispered, her heart breaking. "They are." He understood. The chains weren't made of iron, but of fear. Fear for him. Fear for his daughter. She took a step back, away from him, a silent, agonizing surrender. She turned and walked toward the carriage, each step feeling like she was walking on broken glass. One of the men opened the door. She paused, her back to Jack. "I am sorry," she choked out, unable to turn around. He did not reply. The carriage door closed with a solid, final thud, shutting her back inside the world she hated. Jack stood on the porch, his hands clenched into fists, and watched the carriage's lanterns disappear into the vast, lonely night. The silence in the cabin was a physical thing. It was heavy, suffocating, and empty in a way it had never been before. Jack went through the motions of his life like a ghost. He worked the forge, the ring of his hammer on steel sounding hollow and joyless. He picked Sarah up from Mrs. Ramirez's, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. He packed her lunch, braided her hair, and walked her to the schoolhouse, but the light inside him had gone out. He told Sarah only that Clara had to leave, that sometimes people have to go away even when they do not want to. Sarah, with a child's intuition, knew there was more to the story. She stopped humming when she played with her blocks. She started asking to sleep with the oil lamp burning low, a small beacon against the encroaching darkness. 4 days after Clara was taken, Sarah started coughing. At first, Jack dismissed it, but the cough worsened. Then the fever came, hot and relentless, followed by chills that shook her small body no matter how many blankets he piled on top of her. By midnight, she was burning up, her breathing shallow and ragged. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He wrapped her in a quilt and carried her to the wagon, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold the reins. The doctor's office was stark and sterile under the glare of a single oil lamp. Dr. Morrison, a man whose bills were often paid late by the town's struggling families, examined Sarah in a back room. Jack paced the floor, the sound of his worn boots echoing in the terrifying quiet. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face grave. "It is a bad fever. It is settling in her lungs. She needs medicine, the expensive kind, and constant care, if the fever does not break in the next 12 hours. He left the rest unsaid. Jack's heart plummeted. He pulled out his small leather pouch and emptied its contents onto the counter. A few dollars and some loose change. It was everything he had in the world. "How much?" he asked, his voice cracking. $60, for the medicine and the first 3 days of care. $60. It might as well have been 1,000. "Can I pay you what I have now? I will work it off. I will do anything." The doctor looked away, his expression pained. "Jack, you know the policy. The hospital that supplies me demands payment in advance. My hands are tied." "Please," Jack begged, his pride turning to ash in his mouth. "She is all I have." He was still pleading, his voice breaking, when another voice cut through the tense silence. "I will cover it." Jack spun around. Clara stood in the doorway, her fine traveling coat damp with night mist, her face pale but determined. She walked past him as if in a dream and placed a small, heavy bag of gold coins on the doctor's desk. "Give her whatever she needs," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Put it all under my name. The name is Whitmore." The doctor stared at the fortune on his desk, then looked between them, bewildered. "Are you family?" Clara met Jack's stunned gaze, and for the first time since she'd been taken, a flicker of the woman he'd come to know returned to her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am." An hour later, Sarah was sleeping peacefully, the first dose of medicine already working to bring down the dangerous fever. Jack sat by her bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, his body weak with relief. Clara entered the small room quietly and took the chair beside him. He didn't look at her at first. He couldn't. When he finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "You did not have to do that." "I know," she said softly. He let out a long, shaky breath. "I am sorry. I never should have let you get involved in my life." Clara looked at his daughter, her expression tender. "You did not pull me in, Jack. I came back." He finally turned to look at her, really look at her. She was wearing a dress of dark silk, her hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes were haunted. "Thank you," he said, the words thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I know you do not owe me anything, but thank you for coming back for her." Clara leaned back, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I did not just come back for her. I came back for me, too. You once told me that everyone deserves to walk without pain. That goes for hearts, too." They sat in a comfortable silence, listening to the sound of Sarah's steady breathing. For the first time in days, Jack felt like he could breathe again. The next afternoon, Clara May stood on the polished marble floor of her father's mansion. Gas lamps hissed in ornate fixtures, and priceless paintings stared down from the walls, but she saw none of it. She saw only the cage. Winston Whitmore was behind his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of wealth and power. He didn't look up when she entered. "I assume you have come to your senses," he said, his voice cold. "I did not come back," Clara replied, her voice steady. "I came to get what is mine." He finally put down his papers, his eyes narrowing. "You are living in a fantasy, Clara, playing house with a common laborer." "That common laborer has more honor in his little finger than you have in your entire body," she retorted. "He saved my life." Winston scoffed. "From what? A little discomfort? You had everything here. A legacy, a future, and you threw it all away for a shack and a blacksmith." "I did not throw it away," she said, stepping closer to the desk. "I chose something better. He is a father who loves his child, a man who taught me more about strength in 3 weeks than you have in 20 years. "You think you love him," he sneered. "I do love him." Winston exhaled sharply, as if she'd struck him. "You have no idea what love costs. Real love requires sacrifice, responsibility." "He gives me everything that matters," she cut in, "and I am taking what I need to give him the same." She threw a thick legal document onto his desk. His eyes scanned the first page, and his face went pale. It was a notice from her mother's lawyers. Her mother, who had left Winston years ago, had set up a trust for Clara, one that she could access on her 21st birthday, a birthday that had passed 2 weeks ago, while she was scrubbing floors in Widow's Hollow. "My mother knew what kind of man you were," Clara said, her voice ringing with newfound power. "She made sure you could not control my entire life. That money is mine, and I am taking every last cent of it." Winston stood, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You will be cut off. The Whitmore name will mean nothing to you." "Good," she said, turning to leave. "I have no need for it." She walked toward the grand double doors, then paused, her hand on the brass handle. "Goodbye, Father." He didn't reply. As she stepped out into the hallway, she heard the sound of something heavy crashing against the wall, but Clara May did not turn back. She was finally free. Dawn was breaking when her carriage, a carriage she had hired with her own money, rolled back into Widow's Hollow. She didn't go to the doctor's office. She went straight to the cabin. She carried a basket filled with fresh bread, cheese, and a small bunch of wild daisies she'd picked along the road. A new beginning. Jack opened the door, his face etched with exhaustion and surprise. He stared at her, then at the elegant carriage waiting down the road, and a look of deep sorrow crossed his face. He thought she was here to say a final goodbye. "I brought breakfast," she said simply, holding up the basket. His eyes moved from the basket to her face, searching for an answer to a question he was too afraid to ask. "You came back." "I came home," she replied. Just then, Sarah appeared behind him, her cheeks still flushed from the fever, but her eyes bright. When she saw Clara, her face broke into a huge grin. "You brought flowers!" Clara knelt down, her silk dress brushing against the rough wooden floorboards. "I brought more than that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I brought myself, if you will still have me." Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw her small arms around Clara's neck and hugged her tight. "Forever?" she whispered into Clara's ear. Clara looked up at Jack, who was watching them with tears welling in his eyes. A single tear traced a path through the soot on his cheek. "Forever," she promised. 6 months later, the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the morning air at the corner of Main Street and Church Road. A brightly painted food cart with the words "McGrath's Morning Fare" stood proudly in the morning sun. Jack worked the griddle, flipping pancakes with a practiced ease, while Clara served a line of hungry miners and townspeople. Sarah, perched on a stool, handed out warm biscuits wrapped in cloth napkins. The life they were building was simple, but it was theirs. Claire's hands, once soft and pale, were now dusted with flour, her nails short and practical. But her smile was constant, her laughter easy and frequent. The morning sun caught the glint of a simple gold band on her finger. Not a sapphire, not a diamond, but a promise forged in fire and hardship, witnessed by the entire town. As the morning rush slowed, Jack reached across the cart and took her hand. No words were needed. It was all there in his touch, the quiet contentment of two people who had weathered the worst of storms and found their safe harbor in each other. Sarah surveyed their small kingdom, her face serious. "Papa," she asked, "are we rich now?" Jack and Clara exchanged a look, a shared secret smile. They had a small savings box, a roof over their heads, and a future that was uncertain in all the ways futures are. But they had each other. They had work that mattered. They had built this life with their own 2 hands. Jack swung his daughter up onto his shoulders, and she squealed with delight. "Yes, Sarah girl," he said, his voice full of a joy so profound it seemed to fill the whole street. "We are very, very rich." They were 3 people who had been lost in a storm, and in finding each other, they had found their way home. Their little cart was more than just a business. It was a testament to a simple truth, that the best things in life can't be bought or inherited. They have to be earned. If you enjoyed this story of love, courage, and starting over, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments below. What do you think true wealth really is?